we have to find value a from g of negative 1 from if it equals 0 from function g, which is right here. So what we do is we write out the whole function, g of negative 1 equals a over negative 1 plus 8 over negative 1 squared. And then we can automatically write it a as just negative a because of the negative 1 below it. Then we square this, which 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 makes it a positive 1, which can be just written as 8. So what we do is we add a 0 on the other side of the equal sign, and then we subtract 8 on both sides, which this cancels out. Then negative 8 equals negative a. Then we divide it by negative 1 because any single variable automatically has an invisible 1 next to it. So the negatives cancel out, and then we divide the negative 1 over 8, which just makes it a positive 8 because of the negatives. They cancel out. And that's our answer. 8 equals a. And we test this out by plugging it in with the function of g of negative 1. So what we do is we write it out again. G of negative 1 equals, and we replace the a with 8 over negative 1 plus 8 over negative 1 squared, which would make this negative 8 plus 8, because of the negative 1 times negative 1 equals 1, and that just makes it positive 8 still. And then we add these together, which gives you 0. And so the answer is 8. I'm going to do it, since the area of a rectangle is a equals length times width, then we're going to write it as a of x equals, and what we do is, since there's two x's here, what we're going to do is we're going to subtract it from 8.5, which is the width. So it would be 8.5 minus 2x times 11 minus 2x, because we do the same thing as we did for the 8.5. And that would be our function written in the terms of x. Part B is asking for the domain and range of this function. So what we're going to do is, and how we get the domain and range is that what we do is we write out 8.5 minus 2x, and then we add a 0 at the end. So then we subtract 8.5 on both sides. 8.5 minus 8.5. This cancels out, and that would be negative 2x equals negative 8.5. Then we divide this by negative 2, divide this by negative 2. And the answer would be, for the domain, would be, for the x-intercept, would be 4 1/4, or 4 1/4. Or we could write it as 4.25. And how you could write this out would be 0 x 4.25. I'm using the decimal point format instead of the fraction format. And now for range, we do the same thing, which would be 11 minus 2x equals 0. Subtract 11 on both sides, minus 11. And then we write it. Then this cancels out. There will be negative 2x equals negative 11. Then we divide, 2 by negative 2. Again, the negatives cancel out, and x would be equal 5.5. And this one would be our range. So we would write it as 5.5, 0.5 included, y, then after that, infinity. And that's part B. Part C wants us to replace each x from the function that we got in part A. So let's define an area of 1 inch, 1.2 inch, and 1.5 inches. And what that means is that we're going to take the function that we got from part A, which would be a of x equals 8.5 minus 2x, then 11 times 11 minus 2x, and replace each x. So we're going to write it as a of 1 equals 8.5, open parentheses, minus 2 times 1, close parentheses, times 11 minus 2 times 1, close parentheses. And then we get rid of the parentheses on the inside, which would just be 8.5 minus 2, then 11 minus 2. Then we subtract on in the inside again, which would get 6.5, open parentheses, close parentheses, then open parentheses again, and 9. Now 6.5 times 9 would get 58.5 inches as the area of 1 inch for the border width. So for part 2 of part C, we do the same thing as for 1 inch. So we write it as a of 1.2 equals 8.5 minus 2 times 1.2 times 11 minus 2 times 1.2. Then we close these parentheses again. So then, multiplying these, we would get 8.5 minus 2.4, then 11 minus 2.4. And then subtracting these, 8.5 would become 6.1, and 11 minus 2.4 would be 9.6. After subtracting these, it's 8.6. So then multiplying these, it would get 52.46. Then for part 3 of part C, we would do a repeat of the first part of a of 1, but this time we replace the 1 with 1.5, so 1.5 equals 8.5 minus 2 times 1.5, then times 11 minus 2 times 1.5, and then after that it would be 8.5 minus 3, because we multiplied negative 2 times 1.5, which would get 3, and then times 11 minus 3, because we did the same thing. Then we subtract these 3 from 8.5, which would get 5.5 times 8. And then once we multiply them together, we get 44 inches.